Harold Stanton, a billionaire real estate magnate, woke up in his Manhattan penthouse to a ringing bell that cut through the silence like someone throwing a rock through glass. The lawyer's voice was shaky. "Harold, you're being summoned to federal court. The offshore investigation has reached a new level." His hands, accustomed to signing contracts, were now shaking. Only one word was ringing in his head: betrayal. Someone close to him had leaked the information. A glass of wine from last night was still on the table, but even its taste seemed bitter now. He stepped out onto the terrace, gazing out at the magnificent New York skyline. This was his kingdom. Every tower, every piece of concrete reminded him of his triumphs. But suddenly this kingdom began to totter like a house of cards. Who? Who betrayed him? His thoughts raced. His business partners? His family? Or perhaps his closest friends? That evening he met his daughter, who had a mixture of anger and fear in her eyes. "Dad, they've been writing about you in the news. They say you've stolen billions from people. Is that true?" Harold paused for a moment. He couldn't say no, because he had once indulged in tricks that were now returning like ghosts. When his daughter left, a wave of loneliness washed over him. It seemed as if the whole world he had owned had begun to disappear through his fingers. At the end of the night, he stood in front of the mirror in a dark suit. His reflection looked at him like a stranger. "If the truth comes out, I'm lost," he whispered. For the first time in years, fear crept into his heart. The following weeks became a war. Government agents froze his accounts. The newspapers wrote about the empire of lies. Friends disappeared. The secretary resigned. And the former partners suddenly spoke in court. Harold was sitting in a dark office when he heard a familiar voice on television. His brother, with whom he had once started a business, was giving an interview. "Harold built his fortune on fraud. I kept quiet for years. But the time for the truth has come." These words sent a chill through his body. This was not just a betrayal. This was a blow to the heart. The person he loved and trusted had now become his executioner. At home, his daughter refused to answer the phone. On the street, reporters chased his black limousine. On social networks, they poured mud on him. Everyone became his enemy, even those whose businesses he had once saved. At night, he sat in an empty living room, reviewing documents. His financial empire was shattering like glass. "I wanted greatness. Now I have ruins." The final blow was the loss of his most valuable asset, the Stanton Tower skyscraper. The court ordered him to be arrested. For Harold, it was like cutting out his heart. That evening, he shouted, not at people, but at himself, at his reflection in the mirrored walls. "It's your fault. Yourself." His fist shattered the glass, and blood flowed down his fingers. This act ended in silence. A silence in which greatness turned to ashes. When all seemed lost, a woman knocked on the door of his temporary home. It was Anna, a journalist who had once written exposés about businessmen of his caliber. "Why are you here?" Harold asked coldly. "Because your story is not so simple. I have documents. Someone used your name to cover up their own dealings." She put a folder on the table. Inside were copies of contracts, signatures, bank transactions. Harold's name was there, but forged. "I was framed." He felt the fire inside him rekindle. But it wasn't the thirst for power anymore. It was the thirst for truth. Anna said, "Your brother and two other partners had been running double schemes for years. They knew that sooner or later they would have to find a scapegoat. And they made you that scapegoat." Harold smiled for the first time in a long time, but there was more pain than joy in that smile. "I fought the shadows, and the enemy was nearby." At the end of that night, he was sitting on the roof of the old house where he had now moved. Documents in his hands, a new plan in his head. His eyes shone with determination. "If this is the end, then I will make it my beginning." Harold returned to the world, but no longer as a tycoon, but as a defendant who decided to fight. In the courtroom, he looked his brother straight in the eye. "You destroyed everything we built together." "Why?" he asked. His brother replied coldly, "Because you wanted to be king, and kings are not tolerated here." The trial lasted for days. Anna testified, showing documents. Harold's defense attorneys argued that he was the victim of a conspiracy. However, the prosecution demanded life imprisonment. One night he sat in his cell, contemplating his last chance. He could make a deal to keep part of his fortune and avoid prison if he pleaded guilty. But that would mean forever remaining a thief in the eyes of the world and his own daughter. Either the truth or freedom. All or nothing. In the morning he stood up in court, and said, "I do not admit to what I did not do. If my fate is to lose everything to uncover the truth, I accept it. But I will not sell my own name for the fragments of wealth." The hall froze. This was his rebellion against the system, against betrayal, against his former self. The court's decision was twofold. Some of the charges were dropped, because the evidence of forgeries turned out to be convincing. However, the losses could not be recovered. He was left without an empire, without billions, but free. As he left the court, his daughter hugged him for the first time in months. "I do not know if I can forgive you for everything that happened. But today I saw my real father." They stood among a crowd of journalists, and Harold felt a strange relief. He no longer had to hide behind glass towers. In the evening, he sat in a modest apartment, looking out the window at the same New York. But now he saw a different city, not as a ruler, but as a person. The question remained in his mind. Can you be rich and honest? Or maybe honesty is a different kind of wealth. The world could have taken away his empire, but he gained something more, the chance to become himself again. Freedom turned out to be not what he dreamed of. Although the court partially acquitted him, in the minds of people he remained a corrupter, a shadow player. The doors that once opened by themselves were now locked. Banks refused loans. New partners avoided any negotiations. Harold was sitting in a small cafe in Brooklyn and heard someone whispering at the next table. "Look, it's the same Stanton. See, he even descended here." He smiled bitterly. Freedom without trust is a prison, only without bars. His daughter lived separately, rarely appeared. There was tenderness in her voice, but also caution. She had not yet completely forgiven, and that hurt more than the lost skyscraper. In the evenings he would return home alone, and the city around him seemed alien. It had been his before, but now he was in exile, and with each step a new thought would mature in him. If the world has turned away, then it is time to see something I have not seen before. One morning Anna brought him an old leather folder. "It is not about money, Harold. It is about the truth, which can change not only your fate." Inside were archives, schemes of illegal deals that his former partners had conducted together with politicians. It was an explosive device capable of destroying not only their careers, but entire government structures. "If we make this public," Anna said, "you will finally be called an enemy of the elite. But people will see the truth." Harold was silent for a long time. His inner voice argued, "Fight again. You barely survived, right? Or maybe finally live quietly." But another whispered, "Real wealth is a chance to change the world, even if it hates you." He remembered his daughter's words, "I saw a real father." And he understood, he would only be real when he went to the end. He agreed. And this time he was not driven by the thirst for power. He was driven by the thirst for justice. The publication of the archives shook the country. Newspapers exploded with headlines. Politicians and tycoons who considered themselves untouchable suddenly found themselves under investigation. Harold became a symbol, not of a hero, but rather of a man who broke the system, paying for it with his own life. His name ceased to be associated with the empire of lies and began to sound like a warning. Even the greatest are not immortal. But victory came at a price. He had to live under guard, in constant fear for himself and his daughter. The world elite does not forgive traitors. And yet, as he sat in a small apartment with his daughter and Anna, he felt something he had never had in penthouses and glass towers. "Peace. You're not rich anymore, Dad," his daughter said, looking at him with warm eyes. "I'm richer than ever," he answered, and there was no doubt in his voice. The finale left the question open. Can truth become the new currency of the world? And will it be enough to redeem humanity's past?